I thought I was calling to destroy someone's life, but when a trembling voice answered with 3 words that shattered my world, I discovered that sometimes the person you're trying to break is the only one who can save you. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my 52nd floor office like bullets against armor. I stood motionless behind my obsidian desk, watching the storm rage over Manhattan. At 38, I commanded a tech empire worth $14 billion. Every breath I took was calculated. Every decision ruthless. Every emotion buried so deep that my own reflection looked like a stranger. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, and I was about to make my favorite kind of call. The kind that ended careers. The kind that reminded people who held the power. My fingers drummed against the mahogany surface as I stared at the termination notice glowing on my screen. Sarah Martinez. Junior Software Engineer. Employment duration, 6 years. Reason for termination, unauthorized absence exceeding company policy. My assistant had left the file on my desk with a yellow sticky note attached. She's been missing for 4 days. No contact with HR. No medical documentation. Security badge hasn't been used since Monday morning at 7:23 a.m. I had built my empire on a simple philosophy: loyalty was earned through fear, and weakness was a luxury I couldn't afford to fund. I picked up my phone and dialed the number from her personnel file. The first ring echoed in my ear like a countdown. Second ring. My jaw clenched with anticipation. I'd rehearsed the words a dozen times. This is Marcus Reid. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises tomorrow morning. But on the third ring, something happened that had never happened before in my perfectly orchestrated life. A child answered. Not just any child. A voice so small, so broken, that it seemed to seep through the phone like smoke through cracks in a wall. Please don't hurt my mommy. 3 words. 21 letters. A universe of pain compressed into a whisper that hit me like a freight train derailing at full speed. My prepared speech evaporated. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went white. The storm outside seemed to pause, as if the entire city was holding its breath. What? I heard myself say, though I wasn't sure I'd actually spoken. Please don't hurt my mommy, the voice repeated, and now I could hear the tears. Could hear the raw terror of a child who had learned too young that adults with power were dangerous. She's been trying so hard. She's been working all night on her computer even when she can't see right. She hasn't eaten in 2 days because she says the food is for me. I sat down heavily in my chair, the leather creaking like old bones. Who is this? I'm Emma, the voice whispered. I'm 9. Are you the man who's going to fire my mom? The question hung in the air like a blade suspended by a thread. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. In 40 years of life, 20 years of business, 10 years of absolute power, no one had ever asked me that question. No one had ever reduced my authority to its most human element, the power to destroy lives. Where is your mother? I managed to ask. She's sleeping. But not good sleeping. Bad sleeping. She falls down sometimes and doesn't get up for a long time. She says it's just tired, but I know it's not just tired because tired doesn't make people's hands shake like that. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, my heart actually skipping a beat. What do you mean her hands shake? Emma's voice got even smaller. They shake when she tries to type. And sometimes she looks at the computer screen and squints real hard, like she's trying to see through fog. Yesterday she couldn't read me my bedtime story because the letters were dancing too much. The words hit me like individual punches. Dancing letters. Shaking hands. Falling down. The clinical part of my mind, the part that had built an empire, began processing data points. The human part, the part I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it existed, began to feel something that might have been horror. "Emma," I said, my voice softer than it had been in years, "is your mom sick?" There was a long pause. Then, in a voice barely above a breath, "I think so. But we can't go to the doctor because she says we don't have the special card anymore. She lost it when Daddy left." Insurance. The word materialized in my mind like a neon sign. No health insurance. I thought about my own medical coverage, how I'd had full body scans just because my personal physician recommended it. How I'd never once worried about the cost of being alive. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Is your mom awake right now?" "No. She went to sleep after she threw up." That was. I could hear her counting, 4 sleeps ago. 4 days. Sarah Martinez hadn't been absent from work out of negligence or disrespect. She'd been unconscious for 4 days while her 9-year-old daughter counted sleeps and tried to keep them both alive. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward and hit the window with a sharp crack. "Emma, what's your address?" "Mommy says I'm not supposed to tell strangers where we live." "I'm not a stranger, Emma. I'm your mom's boss. And I'm going to help her." Another pause. Then, in the smallest voice imaginable, "Promise?" The word hit me like lightning striking the same place twice. When was the last time someone had asked me to promise something? When was the last time anyone had needed me to be trustworthy instead of just powerful? "I promise," I said, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in my entire life. She gave me an address in Queens. A part of the city I'd driven through exactly once, years ago, on my way to somewhere that mattered. Now it was the only place in the world that mattered. I didn't call my driver. Didn't alert security. Didn't leave a note for my assistant. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and my phone, and for the first time in 15 years, I left my office without a plan. The drive to Queens felt like traveling through different dimensions. The gleaming towers of Manhattan gave way to cramped apartment buildings with laundry hanging from fire escapes like flags of surrender. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, making everything look like it was melting. Street lights reflected in puddles like fallen stars. The address Emma had given me led to a building that looked like it had been old when my grandfather was young. The front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Paint peeled from the walls like diseased skin. The elevator had an "out of order" sign that looked older than Emma. I climbed 4 flights of stairs, my Italian leather shoes slipping slightly on linoleum worn smooth by decades of struggle. Apartment 4B. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. On the other side of this door was a reality I'd spent my entire adult life avoiding. Poverty. Sickness. Desperation. The kind of problems that couldn't be solved with stock options or hostile takeovers. I knocked softly. The door opened immediately, as if Emma had been standing there waiting. She was smaller than I'd imagined, all sharp angles and enormous eyes. Her dark hair was tangled like she'd been sleeping on it for days. She wore a too large t-shirt that might have once been white but now looked gray with exhaustion. "You came," she said, like she was surprised that adults ever kept promises. I knelt down so we were at eye level. Up close, I could see that Emma's enormous eyes were red-rimmed with fatigue and worry. There were dark circles under them that no 9-year-old should have. I told you I would. She studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. Then she stepped back and let me into the apartment. The smell hit me first. Not unpleasant, but unfamiliar. It was the smell of a life lived too close to the bone. Cooking odors lingered from meals stretched to feed 2 people on a budget meant for 1. There was a medicinal smell, sharp and chemical. And underneath it all, the smell of fear. I had never realized fear had a smell before, but it did. It smelled like desperation and sleepless nights and prayers whispered to a God who seemed to have stopped listening. The apartment was tiny. The living room, kitchen, and dining area were all the same space, separated only by a change in linoleum pattern. But it was clean. Painfully, desperately clean. Every surface had been scrubbed until it gleamed. Magazines were stacked in perfect piles. A few toys were arranged in military precision along one wall. I tried to keep it nice, Emma said, following my gaze. Mommy always keeps it nice, so I tried to keep it nice too. I felt something crack inside my chest. You did a good job. Emma led me to a closed door. She's in here. She doesn't wake up much anymore. The bedroom was even smaller than the living area. A single bed took up most of the space, with just enough room for a small dresser and a child's desk that had clearly been repurposed as a nightstand. And on the bed, looking like she was disappearing into the mattress, was Sarah Martinez. I had seen her personnel photo, of course. In the picture, she'd been smiling, professional, healthy. The woman on the bed looked like a ghost of that photograph. Her skin was gray and waxy. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. Dark hair that had been neat and professional in her photo was now matted with sweat and plastered to her skull. But it was her hands that made my breath catch in my throat. They lay on top of a thin blanket, and they were shaking with fine tremors even in sleep. On the nightstand beside her was an empty bottle that had once contained children's acetaminophen. Next to it was a glass of water with a bendy straw. A child's attempt at medical care. She stopped talking yesterday, Emma whispered. Sometimes she makes noises, but not words. I knelt beside the bed and placed the back of my hand against Sarah's forehead. She was burning up. Even through my shock, my mind automatically calculated, fever, tremors, loss of consciousness, duration of 4 days. This wasn't exhaustion or stress. This was a medical emergency. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. I have a woman, approximately 30 years old, unconscious for 4 days with high fever and tremors. Possible neurological involvement. What's the address, sir? I gave the address, then continued. I need you to route this to Mount Sinai Hospital. I'll meet them there. Sir, we'll take the patient to the nearest appropriate facility. Mount Sinai, I repeated, my voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. Tell them Marcus Reid is requesting direct admission to Dr. Elizabeth Chen's service. There was a pause. Yes, sir. ETA 8 minutes. I hung up and looked at Emma, who was staring at me with wide eyes. Are they going to take my mommy away? They're going to make her better, I said. And then they're going to bring her back to you. But what if they can't? What if she's too sick? Emma's voice was breaking, and I realized that this 9-year-old had been carrying the weight of these questions alone for 4 days. I sat down on the floor beside Emma's small desk. Can I tell you something? She nodded. When I was a little boy, about your age, my mom got very sick too. And I was scared, just like you're scared right now. But you know what I learned? What? I learned that being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave. Because brave people are the ones who keep taking care of the people they love even when they're terrified. Emma looked at me with the intensity of someone hearing a new truth. Am I brave? I felt my throat tighten. Emma, you're the bravest person I've ever met. The paramedics arrived like an invasion of efficiency and purpose. They moved through the tiny apartment with practiced precision, asking questions I answered while Emma held my hand with a grip that could have crushed steel. Sarah Martinez was loaded onto a stretcher that barely fit through the bedroom door, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with electronic concern. Are you the husband? One of the paramedics asked me. No, I said. I paused. What was I? Her boss who'd come to fire her. A billionaire who'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare. I'm a friend. At the hospital, I discovered that being Marcus Reid opened doors I'd forgotten existed. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, whom I'd met at various charity functions, appeared within minutes. Sarah Martinez was whisked away to a private room for immediate evaluation. Emma was given crackers and juice and a coloring book by a nurse who seemed to understand that sometimes children needed something to do with their hands when their hearts were breaking. Dr. Chen returned after an hour that felt like a year. She has bacterial meningitis, she said quietly. Probably started as a sinus infection and progressed. Another day or two and... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. But she'll be okay. Emma asked, looking up from a picture she'd been coloring with desperate concentration. Dr. Chen knelt down beside Emma's chair. She's going to need to stay here for a while so we can give her strong medicine. But yes, sweetheart. She's going to be okay. Emma started to cry then, not the controlled whimpering she'd been doing for days, but the full-body sobs of a child who'd been holding up the world and could finally let it fall. I found myself pulling her into my arms, this tiny stranger who had somehow become the most important person in my life. Over the next 3 days, I lived in that hospital room. I canceled meetings worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I ignored phone calls from board members and investors. I slept in an uncomfortable chair and ate cafeteria food and read picture books to Emma while we waited for Sarah to wake up. On the 4th day, Sarah's eyes opened. She was confused at first, disoriented by the machines and the antiseptic smell and the fact that her 9-year-old daughter was curled up in a chair beside a man in an expensive suit who was reading Green Eggs and Ham with dramatic voices for all the characters. Emma. Her voice was rough from the breathing tube that had been removed that morning. Emma's head snapped up. Mommy. What happened next was a reunion that made me believe in miracles. Emma climbed carefully onto the hospital bed, mindful of the 4 lines and monitoring wires, and Sarah wrapped her arms around her daughter with the strength of someone who had traveled back from the edge of the world. Who is this? Sarah asked, looking at me with confusion but no fear. This is Marcus, Emma said proudly. He's my friend. He saved you. Sarah's eyes widened as recognition dawned. Mr. Reid? But why are you? I set down the book and moved closer to the bed. Because I called to fire you, I said simply. And Emma answered the phone. Over the next hour, I told Sarah about the phone call, about Emma's whispered plea, about the drive to Queens and finding her unconscious. Sarah listened with tears streaming down her face, holding Emma's hand like an anchor to reality. I thought I was going to lose my job, Sarah whispered. I thought you'd fire me for missing work, and then we'd lose the apartment, and Emma would. She couldn't finish the sentence. You're not losing your job, I said. You're getting a promotion. Sarah blinked. What? I had been thinking about this for 3 days, during the long hours of waiting and worrying and watching Emma color pictures for her unconscious mother. I'm creating a new position. Vice President of Employee Wellness. Your job will be to make sure no one else falls through the cracks like you did. Full health benefits, dental, vision, housing allowance. Starting salary is $300,000 a year. Sarah stared at me. That's not possible. It's very possible. I own the company. But why? Sarah asked. Why would you do this? I looked at Emma, who was listening to every word with the intensity of someone learning that the world could sometimes surprise you in good ways. Because your daughter taught me something I'd forgotten. What's that? That the most important thing about having power is how you use it to protect people who can't protect themselves. 3 months later, I stood in my office on the 52nd floor, looking out at Manhattan sparkling in the afternoon sun. But the view that held my attention wasn't the city below. It was the framed photograph on my desk, Emma grinning toothlessly at the camera, holding up a drawing she'd made of the three of us as stick figures under a rainbow. Sarah Martinez had transformed my company's employee wellness program into something revolutionary. Mental health support, emergency financial assistance, flexible work arrangements for parents, comprehensive healthcare that covered everything from routine checkups to catastrophic illness. Other companies were already trying to poach her, offering salaries that made my generous package look modest. But Sarah wasn't going anywhere. She saved my life, Sarah had told me when I'd asked if she was happy in her new role. But more than that, she saved Emma's childhood. That's not something you walk away from. Emma visited the office every Friday after school. She'd set up camp in the corner of Sarah's new office, doing homework and chattering about her day. But she always made time to visit me, bringing me drawings and stories and questions about everything from why elevators made her ears pop to whether I thought aliens existed. Last Friday, she'd knocked on my office door with the serious expression she wore when she had something important to say. Marcus, she'd said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Can I ask you something? Always. Before you met us, were you lonely? The question had caught me completely off guard. Children had a way of asking the questions adults spent their whole lives avoiding. I'd thought about it for a long moment, really considered it. Yes, I'd said finally. I was very lonely. I just didn't know it. Emma had nodded sagely. That's what Mommy says too. She says sometimes you don't know you're thirsty until someone gives you water. Now, looking at Emma's drawing, I understood what she meant. I'd built an empire, accumulated wealth beyond imagination, commanded respect from world leaders and captains of industry. But until a 9-year-old girl had answered a phone call and whispered, "Please don't hurt my mommy," I'd been dying of thirst in a desert of my own making. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, "Movie night tonight. Mommy is making popcorn with the special butter. Can you come?" I typed back, "Wouldn't miss it."